Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Shut the Front Door podcast. This is the Real Talk About Real Estate podcast, I suppose the April Fool's edition. So welcome back. With me, as always, Scott Connors.
How's it going, man? We missed a golden opportunity yesterday.
We missed several because we have been delaying this for way too long. We need to be doing this more often as far as I'm concerned. But you can tell that we are revamping the studio here. Let's go with your dirty little secrets. Thank you, Jimmy, as always, #1 subscriber here.
Yeah, I asked Johnny this morning if he was mad at me because I didn't hear from on April Fool's Day. And it might be the first time in, I don't know, the 15 years I've known you.
Ever in this office. And I have some legendary pranks that we've done over the years. So it's something that I can't believe I let it get away from me this year. Anyways, so yeah, you brought up another good topic here, some dirty secrets about foreclosures.
Yeah, so speaking of April Fools, so you want to buy a foreclosure. Joke's on you.
Well, it's depending, but
that was terrible.
No, you're not wrong, because how many times do we find ourselves trying to bail people out of what we believe to be terrible decisions only for them to proceed without our advice? And then 2 weeks later, they call us and say, this was the worst idea. Why did I ever do this?
Yeah, that happens all the time. And I want to start with, even before you get to that point, twice in the last few days, I've had people reach out to me, potential buyers, and they're saying, yeah, I'm looking for a foreclosure. And when I hear that, my antenna immediately go up because my question is, why?
Right.
And I think for most people, the belief is that I'm looking for a foreclosure because I'm going to get a good deal. That's where the deals are, right? Number one, we don't have very many foreclosures in this market at all. Number two, just because it's a foreclosure doesn't mean it's a good deal. And number three, just because it's not a foreclosure doesn't mean it's not a good deal.
Why is the perception it's a good deal?
Well, the perception is, of course, because people watch a lot of YouTube videos of real estate investors, getting rich on other people's money and all that. And it feels slick, right? It feels like, hey, here's a foreclosure. This is a distressed property. It might need some work, but I can do that work. There's no problem at all. But what we find is that the way foreclosures get priced on the market is someone at a bank typically has to get rid of this property. The bank has taken it back for various reasons, usually for non-payment. And the whoever is in charge of that property at the bank has a job to do, and that job is to get as much money as they can for this property. So they have various ways they come up with those prices. Sometimes they're wrong. We see it more often than not that a foreclosure property gets listed back on the market by a bank and they overshoot it. So right out of the gate, it's not a good deal. In fact, it might be overpriced.
Well, and sometimes it is overpriced because we call that being underwater, because in foreclosure, most of the time, price is set by necessity. So, for example, if they have X amount of dollars that they have on the existing mortgage, they're going to at least try to recoup what's the recourse? They don't sell it. So if they have a $150,000 mortgage, but the market's only going to allow for $125,000, they're underwater. That's what we lead into short sales, which is a whole other different conversation to have.
But even in that situation, the bank has the incentive to get as much as they can. They want to get as close to fair market value for that property as they possibly can. And so they're not going to intentionally underprice something. The bank doesn't say, well, it's a foreclosure, so we better discount the price by 40%. Right? Their job is to recoup as much of that money as they possibly can.
Right. And there's so many other things that go into that equation, including things like how long the previous owner had the mortgage and how much of that interest has accrued and who got it, depending if the if that mortgage was ever sold. When that buyer, during the foreclosure process, they might try to do other alternative options, such as deed in lieu of foreclosure or restructuring their payments. The bank typically says, look, you signed a promissory note. You promised to repay under these terms. Why on earth would we take a loss on this when you are the one that's obligated to pay us back?
Yeah,
so all of these things go into this equation that comes out. And it's not always like, Jimmy, you say here, super easy to think that it's a fixer-upper, but that's only half of the story. Yeah, you're right. We think of foreclosures as like these bargain bin, okay, we get it for a cheap price, we're going to put a little bit of work into it, and then reap the reward. If it was that easy, I ask, why doesn't everybody do that? And I'll let you finish that.
Well, the answer is everybody does do that. And when you have more demand, what happens to the price? It goes up. And so in the typical situation, you have a seller, a bank, who has an incentive to get as much money as they can out of this property to mitigate their losses, like you said. And then you have the market, all the buyers out there who want to buy it, it's going to go to the person willing to pay the most for it in general. So there are no secret hidden foreclosures out there that no one knows about that you can slip in and buy at a discount because the bank just has to unload it. It doesn't work like that. You're competing against all of the other buyers out there. And if there's one thing I know about this market today, there are investors everywhere. Everyone is getting into the game.
Right.
And so the hardest thing to do as a real estate investor is find the deal. And so when you are looking for a foreclosure, I think what you mean is you're looking for a deal.
Right.
Right? Well, let us help you find a deal. And it might be a foreclosure. It might not be a foreclosure.
So this talk, if I'm hearing you correctly, is not necessarily nuanced for the seasoned vets or people that have been in the market. Even if you're looking to get into it, okay, I'm glad you found our channel and that you're listening. But when we get these calls from just the general public, because a foreclosure goes out here, oh, it's a $20,000, $30,000 house, and I could go get a loan for that. Hold on a second. Probably not.
Probably not. And the perception, again, is that I want to find a foreclosure because that's where the deals are.
Right.
I can tell you, and we both work with a lot of different investors, I've never once had a real estate investor who's experienced and making money at it come to me and say, I only want to see foreclosures.
Right.
They say, find me a deal.
A deal.
Right? And that deal might be the off-market property that we know is about to get listed, and there's a cash deal to be had there. I've had two situations lately where private sellers, not foreclosures in any way, not distressed properties in any way, but for various reasons, they wanted to do a quick sale. And so I gave them the option. I said, I can sell this for you today to a cash investor with no inspections who can close in a week.
Right.
Or, and you're going to get X, let's say $60,000, I'm just making up a number. Or we can put it on the market, on the open market, and advertise it to the general public, probably find a first-time buyer. You might get $70,000 or $75,000 out of it to that buyer, but it's going to come with a home inspection and appraisal and lending challenges, right?
And no guarantee that that loan closes.
And that's exactly right. And you're not going to find that out for about 6 weeks because that's how long it takes to close a deal. So the seller has the option to say, yeah, I want to do it quick and easy, and I'll take a hit for that. That's where investors get a deal. And I've had one investor especially get a killer deal in that exact scenario.
Yeah.
The seller knowingly left money on the table, but they did it because they wanted to get it over with quickly.
How many times have we said value isn't always in dollars and cents? Someone who needs to just liquidate an asset or to, that's why pawn shops exist.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it really is. And not that it's being an underhanded thing. I mean, investment is done as a voluntary basis. You don't have to accept a low offer if you're the seller. But if your life circumstances, I don't want to say are drastic, but if you find the value of a lower offer and the convenience of a quick guaranteed closing, by all means.
I did it. I did it on the first house I ever sold of my own where, I had built the house. I raised 3 kids in it. They had their way with the carpet in the walls, and it was a mess. And I was fully planning to move out, replace the carpet, do some painting, get it fixed up to get it on the market. And then a buyer appeared, and I know I took a little bit less for it, but it was done. In a second, I took that deal.
Right.
And moved on with my life. That was my particular situation. But the takeaway for me today is the buyer who comes to me and says, I'm looking for a foreclosure, and I only want to look at foreclosures, doesn't get those deals that the savvy investor is getting. Because the savvy investor knows that being a foreclosure or not has nothing to do with whether I'm actually getting a good deal.
So, correct. So let's just say Jimmy. Jimmy, I'm going to use you as a guinea pig here.
What's up, Jimmy?
If you're still watching. Let's just say Jimmy comes to you as a first-time buyer and says, hey, I just saw this on the market. I want to buy a house. I want to buy this. I want to go look at it.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to be Jimmy. Okay, I'm going to pretend. What are you going to tell me? Hey, when can we go see this property?
We're going to talk price range, right? So you found a house.
Well, I talked to Debbie from West Banco. I'm already approved for a loan.
Already approved? Cool. When you want to go?
So we're going to do this differently. So I'm going to say okay, hold on a second. Debbie from West Banco is awesome to work with. Shout out to Deb. And there's many other local lenders. I don't want to isolate people. But hey, right. At any rate, what type of financing?
What type of financing?
Right. So, how much are you qualified for? Because you would think a government-owned home, a government foreclosed property, and a government loan would go hand in hand. They could not be further apart.
I had a story one time from many, many years ago. Good qualified buyer buying a foreclosure, and we got stuck. So that with a good lender, everything's right on board, right? Government-owned, government loan. So like you just said, should work out great. However, when the previous owner moved out, they cut the shutoff valve off the gas line going to the stove. Okay? Which means that we couldn't get the gas turned on, which means we couldn't get an appraisal done. The government, I think it was FHA or HUD, wouldn't let me go in and screw a gas valve on, wouldn't let the buyer do any repairs whatsoever so we could turn the gas on so we could get an appraisal. the financing literally fell apart over a gas valve. Because you have, so a government-backed loan requires certain things to happen for the appraisal, and a government-owned property won't let you do certain things for the appraisal. It fell apart. We ended up going to a different lender and getting it done.
Right.
But something as simple as that, because the bank-owned properties, especially the government-owned properties, they come with all kinds of rules and regulations. You can't even
change a light bulb. They won't let you touch anything.
In fact, the same deal, my buyer made a mistake and had their appliances delivered the day of closing.
Wow.
Before we closed, we almost had to cancel the closing because you can't do anything to these properties. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think the scenario you were going to with being a first-time buyer, I actually had a call this morning, very similar to what you're saying. This situation was, it's a single-wide trailer built in 1975. We want to go see it. We're pre-approved. No, you're not.
Yeah, there's no loan.
You can't buy that one with financing. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Jimmy, shout out to you for yes, you did, and he followed yours. He took a hit. Jimmy says, "Sam, for us, we sold for less to get it done." Yes. Well, right, you found the value, and Jimmy, we talked about this at length of saying, foregoing your purchasing opportunity, which is what was about to happen if you didn't sell your house.
Right.
They call that opportunity cost. You were about to lose out on the next phase of your life by holding out from what may have gained you $10,000, maybe even $20,000 extra dollars if you waited long enough. Okay, $20,000 is great. I'd love to hand that check to you. But if we don't sell your house, there's no guarantee that was ever going to happen. And two, well, you forego all the other opportunity that was on the table.
Exactly. And so to bring this back around to that buyer who says, I just want to look at foreclosures, we're describing scenarios where a seller can make a decision and leave money on the table to get it done.
Right.
So the typical process with a foreclosure property is you've got an asset manager sitting somewhere. I always picture a guy sitting in Utah at his desk, right? Yeah. And he's got files on his desk that are this high. So they got to sell this property on Main Street in St. Clairsville. They've never been to St. Clairsville. They don't know anything about Main Street. They don't care.
Right.
They hire someone, typically an agent, to go out and give them an assessment of what it should sell for. Now, in case you didn't know this, not every real estate agent is created equal.
Wait, what?
Newsflash.
Oh, my goodness.
And occasionally they might make a mistake. So
Never.
Not us. They hire an agent to say, hey, we need an idea of what this is worth. Agent goes out and looks at it, and they get it wrong. Maybe the house really is worth $80,000, but the agent, for whatever reason, says it's worth $140,000. The asset manager in Utah has no idea.
Charlie, thanks for the light.
Has no idea anything about this property other than that one number that agent gave them. So now, in one of those files on his desk, it says estimated property value $140,000. Okay, so now they put it on the market. Now they want to get it done quickly, so they price it at $130,000. It's not worth $130,000; it's worth $80,000. But they've got to follow rules now to where the private owner can make a decision and say, you know what, I just want to get this done, cut the price and get rid of it. The asset manager in Utah has a checklist, and it says the price is $130,000. After 30 days, we'll make it $125,000. After 30 more days, we'll make it $120,000. And you go to make an offer on it. So now you have a property. It's a foreclosure, but it's overpriced.
So, yep.
And there's no reasoning with them. They don't want to hear about how the roof is leaking and how the furnace doesn't work and how, they don't care.
This is the dirty little secret.
This is
the asset manager. That's the dirty little bastard somewhere in Utah.
Get to talk to. We're not even sure they really exist, but they probably do somewhere. But so now you have a situation where an average buyer comes in and says, hey, I really want to make an offer, but they know it's not worth $130,000. You tell them I'll give them $80,000. You tell them this is why. I get talked to them blue in the face. They don't care.
The asset manager gets paid whether or not it sells. They don't care.
That's exactly right.
And Charlie, yes, you can ask a question, but give us 1 second to rip off this, and then go off on a rip. But go ahead.
Yeah. So this is why you think, well, I'm going to beat them up because it's bank owned and they want to get rid of it. Nope. This is why what's a foreclosure? It's a cheap price. Nope. This is why it needs a bunch of work so I can beat them up on that. Nope. You're dealing with a robot sitting with a pile of files who doesn't care about your offer or anything else about this house.
I will oversimplify the dirty little secrets to foreclosures. You ready?
Yeah.
There's at least two primary. Okay. One, an asset manager, you just said.
Yep.
They basically, nameless, faceless person that has two stamps on their desk. One says yes, one says no.
That's right.
Did this offer that come in equal this? And if so, go ahead and process it, move forward. Did it not, for whatever reason? Maybe it wasn't cash, maybe it wasn't price. It doesn't have to be value. It could be, hey, did this offer come in full price with a home sale contingency? Hell no. They're going to stamp that and throw it. They're going to rip it up, right?
Yep.
Because that's a whole other bag of worms. The second is that it's the equivalent of playing basketball with the biggest guy on the court. You're going to play how they want to play, or you're not going to play at all. They're going to beat you up down in the trenches, throwing elbows. As a buyer, you need to be prepared for this, and that's usually why we say to the not so nuanced, maybe the first person, like this is your first go round. Foreclosures aren't always the best deal. They're not.
They're just not. Now they might be. So the way we handle this, and I'm going to let you read Charlie's question. I assume that's Charlie and not Scott. In a second, and I want to answer because it's one of my favorite topics. So the bottom line for that is, when I'm looking for a listing for one of my buyers, I'm looking at everything. I'm not going to limit it to foreclosures. I'm not going to limit it to not foreclosures. We're going to look at everything on the market and try to find them the best deal they can. Whether it has the word foreclosure attached to it or not is pretty irrelevant.
You want to hear a crazy story?
Fire away.
So Mick, Nicola, one of our investor clients, was buying a property. Yeah, no.
Hey, I know Mick too.
Right. Shout out to Mick. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to Jimmy. That's what we're here for. But Mick was buying a property about 10 years ago. That's actually, it has come full circle. We actually have it under contract again today.
Nice.
That should be closing hopefully shortly.
That's awesome.
But Mick flipped this property, and he was buying it. I think it was listed at like $20,000. I don't know the exact numbers, but just follow me. He made an offer of like $15,000, and they said no. And they kept going, and they kept recirculating once a week. 15,000. They kept saying no. Saying no. They dropped it to $10,000. They didn't counter him. They never countered him. He went and bought it for $10,000. There was an offer a week prior to that for $5,000 because the asset manager just has the files on their desk, and it saved them. I mean, there's no when I deal with a buyer buying a foreclosure process, I swear to you, my script for this is at some point in this time, you're going to be asking me a question. That question is going to be why. And I'm going to look at you and say, I have no reasoning for why they do what they do. It's bureaucratic nonsense. Now, to go over Charlie's question, when you go to a foreclosure auction, why does the bank always have the highest bid? It seems they really like to. I'm sorry, it's hard to see. They set
a really high number that is difficult to justify.
Yeah, yours is closer. Go ahead.
All right, so that's a great question, Charlie, and there's a very good reason for it. This is one of those things that is maybe another dirty little secret. So I'll walk you through a scenario. Mm-hmm. Typically, this happens with foreclosures related to government-backed loans.
Right.
Okay, so let's say it's a VA loan, and the borrower borrowed $200,000 on a VA loan from WestBanco. Now, the way VA loans work is the VA doesn't lend money out. WestBanco lends money out. The government goes to the bank and says, hey, we want veterans to be able to buy houses. Mm-hmm. So if you will lower your standards for the loan, meaning no down payment, different credit standards, if you'll lower your standards so you can lend more money out to veterans, as long as you meet our guidelines, we'll guarantee the money for you.
Government insured.
So you lend them your money, and if they don't pay you back, we got you.
Right.
So now, that $200,000 loan goes out there. A couple years later, maybe the payoff is down to $185,000. Mm-hmm. Well, the guy stops paying, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. WestBanco forecloses. Now, in their back pocket is a guarantee from the government that they're going to write a check for $185,000. Mm-hmm. WestBanco goes through the foreclosure process. It hits the courthouse steps. You go to bid on that property. It runs up to 140, 145, 150, and now there's a guy in a suit representing the bank bidding against you. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not going to let it sell for 150 or 170 if they know they have 185 waiting for them when they cash in their guarantee.
They're bidding up to the...
They're going to bid up to the guarantee because that's easy money for them and they don't have to go through the process. Mm-hmm. So that auction runs up to, say, 170. The bank keeps it at 170. Mm-hmm. 3 months later, the house comes back on the market once the VA has bought it from the bank for 140.
Yeah.
And you say, wait a second, I was at the auction. I was willing to give them 170. Why is it back on the market at 140? Well, that's why. Mm-hmm. Because the bank you were bidding against has a dirty little secret that says, we're getting our money one way or another. Mm-hmm. We're not going to let you buy it for less. Once it goes back to the VA, that guarantee's off the table. The VA owns it. Now they have to sell it for whatever they can get out of it.
And there's somewhat of a prudent reason for that no one ever necessarily talks about. People have tried to scam this and nuance around this. There's no free lunch. If that was the case, I would let my house go into foreclosure. And then I'll just have my best buddy go and say, you know what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just go ahead and knock $40,000 off of my mortgage because I'm just going to let it, and then you go to the courthouse steps and pick it up for next to nothing.
Yeah, they're not going to let
And then give me the keys back.
Right.
You don't think you're the first person who's ever thought of, and that's just one. Like that's an oversimplified version. People have been trying to cut the corners on like their mortgages so all of these bureaucratic, like we are the beneficiaries of decades worth of people trying to game the system. And we solve it with pieces of paper. So what is nonsensical to us today was because somebody got one passed 10 years ago.
That's exactly right.
And that's why we have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm going to go to Charlie's last question first. He says, are they allowed to tell you that number before the auction starts? They're allowed to, but why would they?
Yeah.
They're not going to do that.
Some of the due diligence that we do, and this is why who you work with matters, we can pull up historical data, we can see what the property sold for, and mortgages are of public record.
Yeah.
So we can say, okay, they bought this at $200,000 at a, I don't know, 6% interest, and they've had it for 5 years. We can do math.
Get you an idea.
We can get you a rough ballpark of what to expect. But you're basically going to be bidding against someone who's going to drive the price up to at least the payoff amount.
I think the bottom line is that you just don't know, and it really is difficult to buy a house at the courthouse in an auction. It just doesn't work very often. It can be done, but it's rare. Now, his other question, I'm going to read it, but I'm going to answer it with a question.
I got you.
Okay? So Charlie's question is, how do I'm going to read it in Charlie's intellectual voice.
Yeah.
How do judicial versus non-judicial foreclosures impact a buyer's timeline, negotiation leverage, and potential risks when purchasing a foreclosure property?
That is not Charlie.
Well, that's not. But here's the dirty secret, Charlie. Here's my question for you. Why are you asking ChatGPT what questions you should ask this podcast? Because that's exactly what you did there. And it didn't sound like Charlie, because that's not Charlie.
Yeah.
That's ChatGPT asking that question.
To be thorough, how do judicial versus non-judicial foreclosures? So is that like a judgment? Is that what you're asking? I'm Gandalf.
He's not asking anything.
Yeah. I think what he's asking there is if it's a judge, if it's a forced sale through a judge versus how does that pertain?
I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know that it really does make a difference. If there is an asset manager involved, there is a SOP, a standard operating procedure. Jimmy's laugh. There's a standard operating procedure that is going to basically, again, play like the biggest guy on the basketball court. You're just going to play how they want to play and get thrown some elbows, or you're not going to play at all.
Wait a second. I'm gonna beat Charlie at his own game.
Yeah, okay. It's going to ChatGPT. So in the middle, while you're pulling this up, but yeah, I mean, so when it comes down to it, I don't know that the type of foreclosure necessarily matters too much. I guess they might have their own reasons or their own nuances, but in my experience, every foreclosure I've ever dealt with is different because it goes from the bank. If it's a local owned, if it's not a secondary market, sometimes you can just go to a local bank. But they all have their SOPs.
They do, and really the bigger question. So to give you a direct answer, I'm going to answer it in the comical way here in a second. The bigger problem on the foreclosure side has to do with your lender, not the person or the lender selling it on the foreclosure.
Right.
Because most foreclosures are sold with no repairs, sometimes no inspections, sometimes increased deposits, sometimes things like you can't get the utilities turned on.
Are you saying as is?
No, because those are the two most abused words in real estate, and I refuse. Also, you don't need to have a closet to be a bedroom.
Yeah.
So your bank is going to have certain requirements to get your deal done, and it's going to have to do with utilities being on, appraisal issues, that kind of stuff. And so when you're buying a foreclosure, typically the seller is not going to allow that stuff. They're not going to do that stuff. You really do need to buy it as it sits. How's that? Mm-hmm. As opposed to like a typical seller might come in and do some repairs so your FHA loan can get through.
Sure.
Those are almost impossible with foreclosures.
So you can change a gas valve with a private owner.
You easily can typically, or add one. So I got a funny story about that house I'll tell you someday. Remind me about that. That's another podcast.
Sure.
So since Charlie decided to ask ChatGPT to give us a difficult question because he didn't come up with that on his own, I'm going to turn around and use ChatGPT to answer the question that ChatGPT generated via Charlie. So hang on just a second.
Should be epic.
How do judicial versus non-judicial foreclosures impact a buyer's timeline, negotiation leverage, and potential risks when purchasing a foreclosure property? Well, Charlie, just so you know, I really do appreciate the question.
Yes. Why do we even need to be here? Why can't we just have AI?
The whole thing can be done with AI. So, Charlie, in response to your very thought-out question, I want to give you a very thought-out answer, and it is the type of foreclosure, judicial versus non-judicial, significantly impacts your timeline, negotiation leverage, and potential risks when purchasing a foreclosure property. I'm not going to read this whole thing.
What is, I hear.
It's reading out loud.
Oh, is it?
I can't make it stop.
I disagree with ChatGPT, but I'm not as smart as AI. Right. I don't know that it does. I mean, I don't know foreclosure, to me, foreclosure is foreclosure. Yeah. And the dirty little secret that nobody talks about is how damn difficult it is for no reason.
They're all different, and I think going to what you said, you're going to ask why. My response to that is logic and reason have nothing to do with this process.
Bureaucratic.
It's unrelated.
We need a Doge for the foreclosure market.
All right, so Charlie's next question is, man, we do appreciate the question, Charlie.
Yes, we do.
One thing I see commonly when a house is foreclosed on is the homeowner will trash, beat the house up before leaving on purpose. Can a homeowner be penalized, held responsible for that? Not an AI question. I could tell by the bad grammar.
Yeah. It's just, man, give him a break, man.
Oh, we love Charlie. Charlie's one of the best dudes there is.
Here is,
and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
So the answer to that is, yeah, kind of, except that you have a person who's already not paid their mortgage. They're getting foreclosed on. They probably don't have much to work with. And so
it's not even when you sign a mortgage, Charlie, it'll say in your terms. Now, nobody ever reads their mortgage ever, but in those terms, it'll say for that, like, not to do those things. Don't put concrete in drains. Don't turn it into a commercial property. Like, it'll even go down to like livestock permits and whatever. But it's when you sign that, here's the thing, during foreclosure, it's probably going to get sick in your ears at some point. But I say this so readily often. Rational thought is abandoned with negative emotion. And I can think of very, very few things other than things like divorce and death and loss and foreclosure, the home that you used to know. Most people facing foreclosure, they're not in a very happy state of mind.
It's a rough spot.
And when you abandon rational thought, okay, here come the holes in the walls and the concrete and the drains and everything else. You're right. But at that point, like you said, it's like, you ever see the movie at the end of Rocky V, right after he hits Tommy Gunn, kicks his ass, right? He goes to God, what is his manager, he says, hit me and I'll sue. And he's like, that's right, hit me and I'll sue. And Rocky just, bam, crushes him. And he goes, sue me for what? That's really what it is, right? So, yeah, technically they can be held accountable. What are you going to do out of it?
And there's also an element, if you get into the details, we got to wrap up here. But so when someone's in foreclosure, it's often followed by a bankruptcy. Most mortgage agreements will hold the owner responsible for the shortfall. So if you owe 180 and it goes to foreclosure and sells for 140, they can technically come after you for 40 grand. But if you're in foreclosure, you probably don't have 40 grand.
It's an insolvent
and you're
debt.
going to file bankruptcy, and the bank's going to be stuck with it. So that's kind of how it works. And so you want to trash the house on the way out. So instead of selling for 140, it sells for 120. Well, okay. Yeah. Right. Are you on the hook for that 20? Sure. But they're not going to be able to collect that. Yeah, so, man, good episode. This was fun.
This is awesome. Yeah. So we're going to try and do this more and more. Last question. Can I please hear you sing Dirty Little Secrets?
For All-American Rejects?
Yeah.
We know that tune.
I do. I can't remember how it goes, though. You can hum it in my head. Nah, if I started singing...
we're not singing on this podcast. That's not happening.
maybe next time.
I can play a drum part for you.
There you go. Yeah, I can probably play the guitar part, too. That's not too hard. Should be an easy... We'll do that for you live, Charlie. You play the saxophone.
I mean, yes. I love it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week as always. Make sure to check us out on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you can find social media. We try to be live.
Hey man, you're almost 500 subscribers on YouTube.
I haven't updated that count. We might be. I wanted to be at 500 and we have 50. It says 54 days to go. I picked my birthday. We've been at 492, I think, for like the last. Like we were at 492 within January or somewhere. Yeah. Okay. So I need to move that. I need to move that goal again. Right. But no, we are certainly growing on YouTube. We want to certainly get the Spotify channel continue off the ground, and we need to do more of these and making sure that we get the studio up and running. So
game on.
Stay tuned for more. But thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Rock and roll.